Keanu Reeves walked into the small brewpub on a cool evening.
He was not dressed like a star, not like the man people see on the big screen. He wore a simple black jacket, jeans, and boots. His hair was a little messy and his walk was calm. The smell of roasted barley and fresh bread filled the air. People were laughing, talking, and clinking glasses. It was just another night for them. But for Keanu, it was a chance to sit quietly. Away from the noise of Hollywood. Away from the flashing cameras, he wanted peace. And in this wooden little place, he thought he had found it. He chose a corner table, one that faced the room but kept him half hidden. The light was soft, warm yellow from the hanging lamps. The walls were decorated with old beer barrels and framed posters. The music was low, just a guitar humming in the background. Keanu sat down slowly, his shoulders dropping as if he had been carrying a heavy weight all day. He nodded to the waitress politely, asked for a simple drink and gave her a smile. The kind of smile that was small but full of kindness. The waitress blushed and hurried away, already whispering to another worker that Keanu Reeves himself was sitting at table 6. The news spread quickly but quietly. A few heads turned, a couple near the bar pointed. A man with a baseball cap pulled his phone out but stopped when Keanu raised his hand gently. He didn't want pictures, he didn't want attention. He wanted to be treated like anyone else. The people understood and most of them looked away. They whispered yes, but they also respected his wish. It was strange, almost magical. How a room full of strangers decided to protect his silence. Keanu lifted his glass when it came. He took a slow sip. His eyes looked far away, like he was thinking about something bigger than the little pub around him. He had that way about him, as if his mind was walking in a different place. Some saw him and thought of John Wick. Others thought of Neo from The Matrix. But the man sitting there was not a hero, not a fighter. He was just a human being trying to breathe without the world watching. The customers began to relax again. The bartender cracked a joke and laughter rolled across the room. A group of friends raised a toast. The pub came alive once more, but even in all this sound, there was a strange quiet around Keanu. It was like the air around him carried a gentle wall. No one dared break it, he did not ask for it. But people gave him space. It was rare, a kind of respect that even fame could not demand. But hidden in this calm, something darker was moving. A man sat at a table near the back. Half in shadows, his eyes were fixed on Keanu. Not with admiration, not with respect. His stare was sharp, cold, almost hungry. He wore a heavy coat though the room was warm. His hands never left the table, clenched into fists. He did not drink. He did not eat, he only watched. The few who noticed him thought he was strange. But no one said a word. Keanu, however, felt it. He did not turn his head. He did not break his calm, but deep inside, he knew when someone was looking too long, too hard. He had met people like this before. Some were fans with broken dreams. Some were men with grudges. He had learned to carry peace even when he felt the storm, so he kept sipping his drink, kept watching the wooden floor. But his senses stayed awake. His body was at rest, but his spirit was alert. The mercenary, though no one knew yet that he was one, shifted in his chair. His eyes narrowed. His breathing grew slower. Steady like a predator ready to move, he had been waiting, studying, planning. This was not chance, it was design. He had chosen this night, this place, this man, and Keanu Reeves. The quiet soul in the corner was his target. The pub around them kept buzzing with normal life. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses. None of them knew the storm that was about to break. In that corner sat a man who wanted nothing but peace. In the shadows sat a man who carried violence in his heart. And in between them the world still smiled, not knowing it was about to hold its breath. The man in the shadows did not look like the others in the brewpub. Everyone else was laughing, drinking, eating, or talking about their day. But he sat still, his back straight, his eyes locked on Keanu Reeves. His face carried no smile, only a thin line of tension. His jaw was tight. His hands rested on the table, but they were clenched into fists. He was not there to enjoy the warm food or the cool beer. He was there for something else, something darker. He had been watching Keanu for days, following him quietly, never making himself noticed. To the world, he was just another stranger. But inside his mind, he carried a mission. He was no ordinary man. He was a mercenary, trained in the shadows, paid to do things that most people would never even dream of. He lived in silence, worked in silence, and left chaos behind him. Tonight, his eyes burned with focus. He had studied every step Keanu took, every way he moved, even the way he smiled politely at strangers. To him, this was not admiration, it was calculation. The mercenary's coat was heavy, long enough to hide the weapon strapped beneath. A knife tucked against his ribs, a short baton under his sleeve, and something harder, heavier in the inside pocket. His boots were thick, scuffed from miles of travel. His eyes, though cold, seemed to memorize the layout of the pub, the exits, the windows, the distance between him and Keanu. He was patient, but his patience was laced with danger. From the outside, he looked like a quiet traveler, maybe tired from the road. No one gave him a second thought. A couple laughed loudly at the bar, and the noise covered the silence around him. But inside, he was preparing. His heart did not beat faster like an amateur's would. It was steady, controlled like a hunter waiting in the tall grass. He had done this before, and he knew the rhythm of violence. It was a dance he could perform with his eyes closed. Keanu, sitting at the corner, did not turn to look, but he felt it. He had lived too long in the public eye, too long under the gaze of strangers, to not sense when one stare carried weight. It was not the look of a fan, not the shy glance of someone who wanted an autograph. It was sharp, cutting, the kind of gaze that came from someone who wanted to test him, maybe hurt him. Still, Keanu stayed calm. He lifted his glass, took another slow sip, and let his breath flow steady. If he showed fear, it would give the stranger more power. And Keanu had learned long ago that calmness was the strongest shield. The waitress walked past the mercenary's table. Her tray full of drinks, she smiled politely at him. But he did not move, not even to nod. She felt a chill rise on her arms. As if she had walked past a block of ice, she hurried away, whispering to herself that something about that man felt wrong. But she shook it off, telling herself she was just imagining things. The mercenary shifted in his chair, his hand brushing against the inside of his coat. His eyes never left Keanu. He thought about the mission he had accepted, about the name given to him by the voice on the phone. He thought about the money waiting for him if he succeeded. For him, this was not personal. It was business. Yet even in his cold mind, he could not help but feel a strange excitement. This was not an ordinary target. This was Keanu Reeves, a man respected worldwide, a man who carried himself like both a warrior and a monk. The mercenary felt a thrill at the thought of breaking that calm. The pub around them stayed alive with its usual noise. A man laughed so hard he spilled his beer. Two friends argued about sports. A young couple shared fries and kissed quietly. No one realized that at one table sat a man of peace, and at another sat a man of violence destined to collide. It was like two storms moving silently toward each other, hidden under the roof of a quiet brewpub. The mercenary leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing. He could feel the time drawing near. Every second was a test of his patience. His muscles were coiled tight beneath his coat, ready to spring when the moment came. His stare never wavered. His lips curled slightly into a thin, cold smile. He whispered to himself. So low no one could hear, almost, and Keanu, though his face showed only peace, felt the shift in the air. He knew something was about to happen. He did not know when, he did not know how, but he knew the storm was no longer waiting. It was already inside the room. For the first time that evening, the cozy brewpub was no longer safe, it was a stage, and two players had already taken their places. Keanu sat quietly at his corner table, the glass in his hand half empty. His eyes seemed calm, but inside his mind a small warning bell had started ringing. He could feel the weight of that cold stare still pressing against him. He did not need to look up to know the stranger's eyes were fixed on him. Years of living under constant attention had trained him well. This was different. This was not curiosity, not admiration, it was intent. The air in the brewpub slowly began to change. People were still laughing, still drinking, but the energy felt heavier. It was like a string pulled too tight, waiting to snap. A few customers near the stranger shifted uncomfortably. They did not know why, but they felt uneasy. The man's presence was sharp. It cut through the warmth of the pub. Even the waitress, when she walked by, avoided his eyes. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his posture loose. He knew that showing tension would only feed the stranger. He had no bodyguards tonight, no group of friends. He had come here for peace. Yet now he found himself in the middle of something he did not invite. He placed the glass on the table slowly, letting the sound of it touch the wooden surface with a soft thud. His movements were calm, but his senses were awake. His ears picked up every sound, the scrape of boots, the rustle of a coat, the heavy breath that did not belong to laughter. Then it happened. The stranger pushed his chair back. The screech of wood on wood cut through the low music. The sound was sharp enough to pull heads around. Conversations faltered. The bartender looked up, his hand stopping midway as he wiped a glass. A few people turned their heads toward the corner where Keanu sat. They did not know what was wrong, but they knew something was about to happen. The stranger's boots hit the floor one after another. Heavy, deliberate. His shoulders rolled slightly, and his long coat swung as he stepped forward. The distance between him and Keanu began to shrink. His gaze never broke. He walked with the rhythm of someone who had made up his mind. He was no longer just watching, he was moving. Keanu did not move from his seat. He only lifted his eyes slowly, their calmness steady and unshaken. For a second, the two men locked gazes. The silence between them was louder than the laughter that had filled the room just moments ago. It was like two currents of energy colliding, one filled with calm strength, the other with sharp violence around them. The pub began to fall into whispers. A woman at the bar leaned toward her friend and asked what was happening. A man near the door pulled out his phone, but his hand froze when the stranger's presence grew heavier. It was as if everyone could feel the danger in the air, even if they did not understand it. Parents pulled their children closer. Couples leaned back against their chairs. The music still played, but it felt far away, like it belonged to another world. The stranger stopped only a few feet away from Keanu's table. His lips curled into a small, thin smile that did not touch his eyes. He said nothing, but his body spoke loud enough. His fists flexed, his shoulders tightened. His shadow fell across Keanu's table like a dark blanket. Keanu did not flinch, he did not shrink back. Instead, he sat straight, his calmness a shield. He let the stranger feel that he was not shaken. That quiet strength only seemed to anger the man more. A low growl of frustration escaped him. He wanted fear, he wanted weakness. But he was met with patience that patience felt like defiance. The bartender cleared his throat loudly, trying to break the tension. "Hey, buddy, you need something?" he asked the stranger. But the man did not even turn his head. His eyes were locked only on Keanu. His voice finally broke the silence, low and rough. "You think you're safe here?" he said. The words were not loud, but they carried weight. They froze the air. Keanu's reply was simple, his voice steady, soft, but filled with meaning. "I'm just having a drink," he said. The quietness of his answer held more power than shouting could. It made the stranger's jaw tighten. It made his steps grow sharper. The crowd now knew this was no misunderstanding. This was no drunken mistake. This was danger unfolding before their eyes. A chair scraped as someone moved back quickly. A glass toppled, spilling beer across the table. The room grew restless. People were unsure whether to stay or run, but none of them dared to interfere. The mercenary leaned closer. His breath heavy, he towered over the table, his shadow swallowing the light. Keanu's fingers rested on the table edge. Loose but steady, his eyes did not blink. His voice did not rise. The room had become a stage, and every soul inside it was now an unwilling audience. In that moment, silence filled the air. Silence before the storm. Silence that stretched too long. The stranger had made his move, stepping out of the shadows. His intent was clear, and Keanu, calm as ever, faced him without fear. The pub itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next sound, the next strike, the next moment when peace would shatter. The silence inside the Brewpub broke like glass when the mercenary moved. His arm shot forward without warning, knocking over the small table between him and Keanu. Glass shattered, liquid spilled, and the sound echoed across the wooden floor. People gasped and stumbled back, chairs scraping loudly as the quiet pub turned into chaos. The mercenary's fist came down with violent speed, aiming for Keanu's face. But Keanu did not scream, he did not even flinch. He slid his chair back just enough, the heavy fist missing him by inches. The table collapsed with the weight of the strike, splinters flying. The bartender yelled for someone to call the police, but his voice was drowned in the panic of the crowd. People rushed to the corners trying to escape, but their eyes stayed fixed on the unfolding scene. The mercenary growled, his face twisted with rage. He grabbed Keanu by the jacket, pulling him upward. His strength was terrifying, his grip like iron. Keanu's boots lifted slightly off the floor. Still, Keanu's face carried calm, his eyes steady, his lips pressed together but not trembling. The mercenary wanted to see fear, but he saw only peace. That made him angrier. Chairs fell as people tried to push away from the fight. A woman screamed, her voice sharp in the chaos. Someone dropped a plate, the crash mixing with the sounds of panic. The waitress who had earlier brought Keanu his drink stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth. She had never seen violence like this, not in this little place. The mercenary shoved Keanu hard against the wall. The wooden panels rattled under the impact. The lights above swung slightly, casting long shadows. "You think you can hide?" The mercenary hissed, his words dripping with venom. He pulled a knife from under his coat, the blade glinting under the pub's dim light. Gasps filled the room. Fear spread through the air like smoke. Keanu looked at the knife, then back at the man. His voice was low, almost calm. "This isn't the way," he said. His words were quiet, but in the silence that followed, everyone heard them. It was not a plea, it was not fear. It was truth spoken with steady courage. The mercenary snarled, pressing the blade closer, his eyes wild. He wanted to end it quickly, to finish the job. His hand trembled not from weakness but from hunger for violence. The crowd pressed against the walls, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe too loud. No one dared step in. It was between the two men now. Keanu's hand slowly lifted, not to fight, not to strike, but to gently push the blade away. His movement was slow, deliberate, showing no fear. The mercenary growled louder, slamming him harder against the wall. The edge of the blade nicked Keanu's jacket, cutting a small tear. The room filled with gasps again. "Stop!" someone shouted from the bar, but their voice was swallowed by the tension. The mercenary's focus was locked. His muscles tightened, his arm pulled back, ready to strike for real. The crowd held its breath. The waitress whispered a prayer under her breath. People expected blood, expected the calm man in the corner to finally break. But Keanu's calm only grew deeper. His silence carried weight. He looked into the mercenary's eyes, not with anger, but with a strange kind of sorrow, as if he saw something broken inside the man. That look shook the mercenary for a heartbeat, but rage quickly covered it again. His teeth clenched, his arm began to swing forward. The moment stretched long. The room seemed frozen, every sound slowed, the knife cutting through the air. The light above caught the blade, shining for one sharp second, and just as the strike came down, a new sound cut through the chaos. A voice, deep, steady, and filled with authority. "That's enough," the voice said. The mercenary's arm stopped mid-swing. His head turned. His eyes widened for the first time that night. The crowd turned too, searching for the source. From the far corner of the pub, a figure rose, tall, broad, his steps slow and deliberate, his face calm, but his presence heavy with power. It was Seagal. The pub fell into silence again, silence filled with shock. People could not believe their eyes. In one corner, Keanu Reeves stood pinned against the wall by a mercenary's knife. In the other, Seagal walked forward, his shadow stretching long across the wooden floor, his eyes locked on the attacker, his voice calm but unshakable. The mercenary gritted his teeth, pulling Keanu closer as if to shield himself with his target. But for the first time, his grip was not steady. His eyes flickered with something new, hesitation. He had not expected this, he had not planned for it. The room, once filled with fear, now carried a different kind of energy. The crowd could feel it too. Relief mixed with suspense. Keanu, still calm, slowly turned his head toward the man who had spoken. His lips curled into the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of recognition. For the first time in that night of chaos, he was not alone. The storm had met another storm. The room that had been filled with screams and panic only seconds before now fell into a strange silence. Every head turned toward the corner where the calm, deep voice had come from. The mercenary's hand froze, his blade still hovering close to Keanu's chest. His eyes narrowed as he looked past his target, and there he was, standing tall and unshaken, Seagal. He had been there the entire time, sitting in the shadows, sipping his drink slowly. He had not spoken, he had not moved, he had simply watched. His broad shoulders and sharp jawline had blended into the dim light. The regulars had not even noticed him. To them, he was just another man enjoying a quiet evening. But the moment had come, and now his presence filled the room like thunder before a storm. Stephen stood with a steady grace. His body moved slowly, but every step carried weight. The wooden floor creaked under his boots. His eyes were fixed on the mercenary, cold and sharp, not with panic, not with anger, but with certainty. It was the look of a man who had seen violence before and was not afraid to walk straight into it. The mercenary's grip on Keanu tightened, his lips curled into a sneer. "Stay back," he growled. His voice tried to sound strong, but there was a crack in it. The blade pressed harder against Keanu's chest. Keanu stayed calm, his breath steady. His eyes watched, not the knife, not the mercenary, but the man now walking toward them. The crowd felt it too. The panic that had gripped them moments ago began to shift. Whispers ran through the room. Someone said Steven's name, and the rest caught on. "It's him," a man muttered. "That's Steven Seagal," another whispered. Their fear turned into awe. The waitress who had been frozen near the bar gasped. Her eyes wide, she had served this man earlier. Not knowing who he was, Steven did not hurry. He did not rush, he moved like a wave, calm but unstoppable. His hands hung loose at his sides, but his presence was heavy enough to make the mercenary step back a half-inch without meaning to. The man shook his head quickly, trying to cover the slip. He raised his voice. "I said stay back." His knife trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the sudden realization that he was no longer in control of the room. Keanu felt the tension change. He did not move, but his calm smile grew faintly. For the first time, the mercenary's eyes showed something other than rage. They showed recognition. He knew who Steven Seagal was. He knew the stories, the fights, the skill. He had not expected to meet another warrior here. Not tonight. Steven's voice came again, steady, deep, like stone against stone. "Let him go," he said. There was no shout, no anger, only command. His words rolled across the room, and the crowd held their breath. The mercenary's jaw clenched. He pressed the blade tighter, trying to regain control, but Steven's calm was heavier than his threats. The bartender ducked behind the counter, peeking over with wide eyes. A couple near the door whispered to each other, torn between running out or staying to see what would happen. No one wanted to miss it. This was no longer just a fight, it felt like history, two forces colliding in the most unexpected place. The mercenary tried to laugh, but it came out broken. "You don't scare me," he spat. His words aimed at Steven, but his body betrayed him. His shoulders stiffened, his grip shook. He knew what kind of man stood before him, and it unsettled him. Steven stopped only a few feet away. His body was still, his eyes locked on the mercenaries. He did not need to move fast. He did not need to raise his voice. His very presence was enough to tilt the balance. Keanu's calmness had held the storm, but Steven's arrival had changed the storm itself. The crowd leaned in without meaning to, every pair of eyes fixed on the standoff. The pub no longer felt like a place of food and laughter. It felt like a stage. The mercenary with his knife, Keanu calm against the wall, and Steven standing tall. The tension was electric. No one spoke, no one dared to even breathe too loud. Steven lifted his hand slowly, not in fear, not in surrender, but in warning. His fingers curled lightly, a small gesture that carried weight. The mercenary's eyes twitched. He understood the message. Steven didn't need to fight yet, but if he did, the outcome was already written. For a long second, nothing moved. The music in the background had stopped, or maybe no one could hear it anymore. The only sound was the soft buzz of the lights and the quick breaths of frightened customers. The mercenary's heart raced, but Steven stayed steady. It was predator meeting predator, but only one carried the calm of certainty. Keanu finally spoke, his voice low, steady as always. "You don't have to do this," he told the mercenary. The words floated gently, but they struck deep. The mercenary growled. Shaking his head, his anger rose again, trying to drown out his hesitation, but Steven's eyes never left him. The fight was not yet physical, but it was already a battle of presence, of will, of who would break first. And as Steven stood tall, calm as stone, and Keanu stayed silent in the mercenary's grip, everyone in that pub knew the same thing. The night was only beginning, and what came next would decide everything. The air inside the Brewpub felt thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The mercenary stood tense, his knife close to Keanu's chest, his eyes darting between his calm target and the tall figure now moving closer. Steven Seagal walked with the kind of confidence that came from years of facing danger. He did not rush, he did not shout, he simply advanced step by step, until the sound of his boots echoed over the silence of the room. "Let him go," Steven said again, his voice deep, low, and steady. It was not a request, it was a command. The mercenary's jaw tightened. His grip on Keanu's jacket grew stronger, but there was sweat forming on his brow. For the first time that night, doubt crept into his eyes. He had faced men before. Men who begged, men who cursed, men who cried. But this was different. Steven Seagal did none of those things. He radiated calm strength, and that calm was more frightening than rage. Keanu remained still, his face close to the blade, but his eyes never showed fear. He looked at Steven and gave the faintest nod. It was not a call for help, not a sign of weakness, it was trust. A silent agreement that the balance of the night had shifted. The mercenary tried to regain control. He pressed the knife harder, making the crowd gasp. "Stay back," he barked. His voice cracked slightly. He wanted power. But Steven's steady steps stripped it away with each second. The mercenary's arm trembled even as he tried to look strong. He glanced around, noticing the eyes of every customer glued to him. People were not just afraid of him anymore. They were waiting for Steven, hoping, almost expecting him to act. Steven stopped a few feet away. His hands were relaxed, but his presence was heavy. "You don't want this fight," he said softly. His tone carried no anger, no fear, only certainty. The mercenary's chest heaved. His eyes flickered with recognition. He knew exactly who Steven Seagal was. He knew the stories, the films, the training. And even though this was reality, not cinema, he could not ignore the truth standing before him. For a long second, the mercenary froze. His mind racing. If he attacked, he risked facing Steven directly. If he retreated, he would lose everything. He had never been cornered like this before. His breathing grew louder, heavier. His blade shook slightly, and Keanu felt the movement against his chest. Yet still, Keanu did not flinch. His calm only deepened the mercenary's frustration. The crowd could barely hold still. A woman near the door whispered to her friend, "He's going to stop him." A man near the bar clenched his fists nervously. The waitress pressed her hands together tightly. Praying under her breath, the entire pub had turned into an audience, waiting for the first strike, waiting for the storm to break. The mercenary finally let out a roar of anger, a desperate sound to cover his fear. He shoved Keanu against the wall harder, knocking the breath out of him for a second. Then he turned his full attention toward Steven. His lips curled into a snarl. "You think you can stop me?" He spat, his body tensed, ready to strike. Steven did not blink. His gaze locked onto the man's eyes. "I don't think," he said slowly. "I know." His words fell heavy in the silence. Like stones into water, the mercenary's anger exploded. He swung the knife outward, slashing through the air, hoping to force Steven back. The blade flashed under the light, but Steven's body moved with practiced ease. He stepped aside, smooth, graceful, as if he had seen the move before it even happened. The mercenary stumbled slightly at the miss. His eyes widening, Steven did not attack yet. He let the man's rage wear him down. He stood steady, waiting for the next move. The mercenary roared again, charging forward with another strike. This time, Steven raised his hand, caught the mercenary's wrist mid-swing and twisted. The sound of bones straining echoed in the room. The knife clattered to the floor, spinning under a table. The crowd gasped, some even cheered. Keanu stepped aside calmly, freed from the mercenary's grip. He brushed his jacket lightly as if shaking off dust, his face still calm, his eyes steady. Steven's hand still gripped the mercenary's wrist. His movement effortless, his voice remained low. "I told you to stop," he said. The mercenary groaned, trying to pull free. But Steven's hold was like iron. The room erupted with whispers. "He did it," someone said. "Look at him," another added. Hope filled the air where fear had been moments ago. The bartender finally picked up his phone, calling for help, but it no longer felt urgent. Steven had already taken control. The mercenary's knees buckled, but his pride forced him to stand. He spat to the side, his breath ragged. His other fist swung wildly toward Steven's face, but Steven moved again, smooth as water. His head tilted slightly, the fist missing by inches. In the same motion, Steven stepped closer, his shoulder pressing into the man's chest, forcing him back. The mercenary crashed against another table, the wood splintering under his weight. The crowd gasped louder now. Some clapped, others shouted in shock. The mercenary groaned but still tried to rise. His pride wouldn't let him stop. He reached for Steven again, but this time Steven's hand moved faster. His palm struck the mercenary's chest, hard but controlled. The impact knocked the breath out of him. His knees finally gave way. He collapsed to the floor, gasping. Stephen stood tall above him, his breathing calm, his stance unshaken. He looked down at the man, his eyes cold but steady. "Stay down," he said simply. His words were heavier than any strike. The mercenary wheezed, his pride broken, his strength drained. He glared up at Stephen but did not rise. Keanu finally stepped forward, his calm voice breaking the tension. "It's over," he said softly. The crowd exhaled together, as if they had been holding their breath the entire time. Relief swept across the pub. People whispered, some even cheered quietly. The waitress wiped tears from her eyes. The night that had begun with peace had turned into chaos and now into silence once again. But this silence was different. It carried awe, respect, and the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. In the middle of it all stood Steven Seagal, calm as stone, and Keanu Reeves, untouched in spirit. The mercenary lay on the floor of the Brewpub, gasping for air. His chest heaved, his face red with rage and shame. The crowd thought it was over. People began to relax, some even clapping nervously. A few whispered that Steven Seagal had ended the fight, but the mercenary was not finished. His pride burned too hot. He could not accept defeat. Not in front of so many eyes. Not with his target still standing calm. He rolled to his side slowly, his hand reaching for the edge of a broken table. His fingers curled around a splintered piece of wood. He gripped it tightly, turning it into a weapon. His eyes were wild now, filled with desperation. He staggered to his knees, wobbling like a wounded beast. The crowd gasped again. Fear rushed back into the room. They realized the fight was not over. Steven stood tall, only a few steps away, his arms loose at his sides, his breathing steady. He did not rush forward. He waited, his sharp eyes watching every movement. He knew the mercenary still had fight left in him. He could see it in the man's trembling shoulders, in the fury burning in his stare. With a roar, the mercenary lunged forward, swinging the jagged wood like a blade. His strike was fast, filled with raw desperation, but Steven moved smoother than water. His hand rose, catching the mercenary's wrist once more. The crowd heard the crack of bone and the splintered wood falling to the floor. The mercenary screamed, his arm twisted, but he didn't stop. He threw his other fist at Steven, but Steven tilted his head calmly, the fist slicing through empty air. In one fluid motion, Steven shifted his weight. His legs swept low and the mercenary crashed to the ground again. Tables rattled, glasses fell, a chair toppled with a loud thud. The mercenary groaned, trying to push himself up. His rage would not let him stay down. He lunged again, his body wild and clumsy, but Steven was ready. He moved like a shadow, sidestepping easily. His palm struck the mercenary's shoulder, forcing him off balance. His other hand gripped the back of the man's neck, pressing him face first into the wooden floor. The sound echoed through the silent pub. Gasps filled the air. Some customers clapped their hands over their mouths. The waitress dropped her tray, her eyes wide. A man whispered, "It's like watching a movie." But this was no movie, this was real. And Steven Seagal was showing the difference between training and rage. The mercenary squirmed under Steven's grip. His legs kicked, his fists pounded the floor. But Steven's hand held him like iron. His voice came low, steady. "Stay down," he said again. The mercenary growled, trying to buck against the weight. But Steven's knee pressed into his back, pinning him. For a moment. Silence filled the room again. The mercenary's breathing grew ragged, his body shook with fury. His pride was broken, his strength drained. Yet still his spirit resisted. He refused to accept defeat. He screamed, a sound of pure frustration. And with one final burst of energy, he twisted his body, managing to slip partially out of Steven's hold. He rolled onto his side, grabbing a broken glass from the floor. His eyes burned, his arm raised. He aimed the sharp edge straight at Steven's chest. The crowd shouted in terror. Someone screamed, "Look out!" But Steven was already moving, his hand shot forward, faster than the eye could follow. He gripped the mercenary's wrist midair. Twisting hard, the glass flew out of his hand, spinning away harmlessly before the mercenary could react. Steven's other hand struck his chest, not with wild power, but with sharp control. The mercenary flew backward, crashing against a table that broke under the impact. The wood splintered loudly, drinks spilled, plates shattered. The mercenary lay on his back, groaning, his eyes wide with shock, his body finally refusing to move. The crowd erupted into whispers and gasps. Some even cheered now. They could not believe what they had just witnessed. The waitress clapped her hands over her mouth, tears filling her eyes. The bartender leaned against the counter, his phone still in his hand but forgotten. Everyone knew the fight was finished. Truly finished. Stephen stood tall, his breathing still calm, not even heavy, his eyes locked on the fallen mercenary, waiting to see if he would rise again. But the man stayed down, groaning weakly. His pride shattered, his body broken, his spirit defeated. He had given everything he had, but it had not been enough. Keanu stepped forward slowly. Brushing the dust from his jacket, his calm smile returned. He looked at Stephen with quiet respect. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice steady, clear enough for the whole room to hear. The words carried more weight than 1,000 cheers. Stephen gave a small nod. His expression did not change. He did not bask in the attention. He did not need applause, he simply did what had to be done. The room watched him in awe. He walked past the fallen mercenary, his steps steady, his presence unshaken. The mercenary groaned again, trying to roll onto his side, but his body would not obey. He lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing at last that he had lost, not just to Steven Seagal's skill, but to his calm, unshakable strength. The brewpub slowly came alive again. People spoke in whispers. The tension melted. Replaced by awe, fear was gone. Relief filled the room. But no one would ever forget what they had seen. A mercenary had attacked Keanu Reeves. But in the end, Steven Seagal had stepped in, and the fight was decided with grace, control, and unstoppable strength. The mercenary lay on the floor of the brewpub. Groaning in defeat, his strength was gone, his body battered, and his spirit broken. The weapon he had grabbed was lost, his knife out of reach. The splintered wood scattered around him. The fight was truly over, and everyone in the room knew it. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with awe. Steven Seagal stood tall, his broad frame unshaken. He looked down at the man on the ground, his eyes steady and calm. He did not gloat, he did not smile. He only gave a small nod as if confirming to himself that the danger had passed. His breathing was even, his movement slow. He looked as if he had not even broken a sweat. For him, this was not a victory to celebrate. It was simply what had to be done. Keanu Reeves stepped forward from where he had been pressed against the wall. He brushed the dust off his jacket, straightened himself, and looked around the room. His calm face showed no anger, no hatred, only quiet gratitude. He turned to Stephen, his voice low but clear. "Thank you," he said. It was not a dramatic statement. It was simple, but it carried weight. Every person in the brewpub heard it, and they felt the meaning behind it. Stephen only nodded in reply. He did not need words. His silence spoke louder than anything. The crowd stared at them, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had just witnessed two men they had only seen on screens. One attacked, the other stepping in, and it felt almost unreal. Yet it had happened right before their eyes. The waitress wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She had been frozen with fear during the fight, but now relief flooded her face. She whispered softly, "They're heroes." The bartender leaned on the counter. Shaking his head in disbelief, he muttered, "I'll be telling this story for the rest of my life." The customers slowly began to return to their seats, their hands still trembling, but their voices rising with whispers. "Did you see that?" One man said, "He moved so fast," another added. A woman held her friend's arm tightly. "Keanu didn't even panic," she whispered. The energy in the room shifted from terror to amazement. It felt like they had been given a story no one outside these walls would believe. The mercenary tried to push himself up one last time, but his body refused. His pride forced him to glare at Stephen, but even his eyes showed the truth. He had been beaten completely, not just by strength, but by control. He groaned and lay back down, staring at the ceiling, realizing his mission had failed. Keanu looked at him, his voice soft. "You should stop now," he said. His words were not cruel, they carried no anger. They were filled with something else, pity. Even in the face of violence, Keanu's nature was to show compassion. The mercenary turned his head away. Unable to meet his gaze, Stephen finally stepped back, releasing the last bit of pressure he had kept on the man. He glanced at the bartender and said calmly, "Call the police." His voice was low, but it carried command. The bartender nodded quickly, fumbling for his phone again. This time his hands were steady, because he knew it was truly over. Keanu and Stephen stood side by side for the first time that night. The crowd looked at them together, two figures of calm strength. The energy between them was quiet, respectful. Keanu gave a small smile, and Stephen, though his face remained serious, gave the slightest nod in return. It was not friendship born in long years, but respect born in a single moment. The room seemed lighter now. People slowly began to breathe normally again. The music that had stopped earlier played softly in the background. It sounded different now, softer, almost peaceful. A few people even began to clap quietly, not like at a concert, but like witnesses honoring what they had just seen. The waitress approached nervously, her hands shaking as she carried 2 fresh drinks. She placed them on the nearest table and said, "On the house." Her voice was small but filled with respect. Stephen glanced at her, gave a small nod, and sat down again as if nothing had happened. He lifted the glass and took a slow sip, calm as ever. Keanu looked at him with quiet admiration. He sat too, resting his hands on the table. His eyes carried the kind of gratitude that did not need long speeches. "Not many would have done that," he said softly. Stephen shrugged lightly. "Not many had to," he replied. The people around them whispered, amazed at the normalcy of their words after such chaos. But that was who they were. 2 men who carried peace in their silence, strength in their calm, and courage in their actions. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. The police would soon arrive. The mercenary groaned again. But no one looked at him anymore. Their eyes stayed on Keanu and Stephen. The mercenary had brought violence, but these 2 men had brought something stronger. Dignity. The night at the Brewpub would never be forgotten. People would tell the story again and again. Some would say it sounded like a film. Others would swear they had seen real heroes. But those who had been there would never forget the truth. They had witnessed calm against chaos, courage against violence, and respect born in the most unexpected place. In the end, Keanu Reeves finished his drink with quiet grace. Steven Seagal finished his with steady calm. And the people who watched them knew one thing clearly. They had not just survived a night of fear. They had been part of something unforgettable, a story they would carry for the rest of their lives.